In this video, we're going to look at 75 of the most essential chess terms that every chess player should know. I'm going to go rapid fire. I'm going to try to complete this video in under 30 minutes, but we'll see how that goes. If anyone watching this has already heard of all 75 of these, please let me know in the comments. I would be very impressed. There's going to be timestamps in the description below, so feel free to click on those, jump around to specific terms that you're interested in, but we've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. All right, term one is an active piece. In chess, an active piece is a piece that controls a lot of squares, or sometimes it controls very important squares. Term two is algebraic notation. This happens automatically online, but when you play a game, the moves are recorded off to the side, g3, d5, bishop g2, knight c6. You can see all these. That is referred to as algebraic notation. Term number three is analysis. When you're going back after a game and trying to learn from your mistakes and see where you went wrong, if you put it into a chess engine like here, and it shows you what the best moves are as you walk through it, that's referred to as analyzing your game. And doing this with the computer is the best way to do this because you can very quickly see where you went wrong and what mistakes you made and how you can fix those going forward. Term number four is a backward pawn. A backward pawn is a pawn that can't be supported by other pawns on adjacent files. So in this position, if black plays e5, I play queen d3, this pawn on d6 is now considered a backward pawn because there's no pawn over here next to it, and the only pawn that would be adjacent to it here has already advanced to where it can no longer protect the pawn and it can no longer support it if this pawn tries to move forward, so that's now considered a backward pawn. That's usually a good target because since they can't easily be defended or move forward, if you can pile up some pieces on it, a lot of times you can capture those pawns and win a pawn. Term number five is what's called a bad bishop. A bad bishop is a bishop that is stuck behind your own pawn chain. So if I were to play d4, d5, and then play e3, I've created a bad bishop because it's stuck behind these pawns. This is not a bad bishop because it can very easily get out and go to a lot of good squares. Bad bishop, good bishop. Term number six is a battery. In chess, batteries are when you line up long-range pieces either on a file or a diagonal. In this position, if I were to play queen to c2, I'm creating a battery along this file because my rook and queen are now lined up. I'm also creating a battery along this diagonal because my queen and bishop are lined up. Usually this is pretty good because your pieces can work together to either attack something or threaten something, and they help each other when they're connected like this. Term number seven is blindfold chess. This is just what you would expect. You play chess without looking at the board. Lots of strong players can do this in their head pretty easily. Personally, I can only play, I think I've only ever tried to do 2 or 3 games at a time. That's pretty much my limit, but there are very strong grandmasters who can play many, many games at the same time. You can see the world record is 48 games played at the same time, which is pretty crazy. Term number 8 is bullet chess. Bullet is usually when you have 1 or 2 minutes for the entire game, so it is very, very quick. Term number 9 is blitz chess, which is usually 3 to 5 minutes for the whole game, so a little bit longer. This is probably one of the most common types of speed chess. Term number 10 is rapid chess. That's when you fall into the 10-minute and more range. You've moved out of blitz and into rapid. Term 11 is Bughouse chess. Bughouse is where you have a teammate and you're both playing against 2 other people, and whenever you capture a piece, you give it to your opponent. So if I take this knight, my opponent would now have that piece and he could drop it on the board. Also, if he takes a piece and gives it to me, I could then place it directly onto the board, and so if I had like an extra knight, I could just put it right there. I don't have to move it, I just drop it right on the board. Term number 12 is book move. When you're playing a chess opening, there are certain moves that have been played in the past, and those are referred to as book moves. These are like the top players have played them, and that's called the opening theory, and that's what a lot of people follow. So if I'm playing the Sicilian defense, the main line is knight f3, d6, d4, captures, knight f6, knight c3. All of these are book moves because they've been played before. If black at this point were to do something really crazy, bishop to h3, it's a terrible blunder. That's not a book move. This is no longer in the book. Top players don't play that. I think the book move, the main line is a6. This is the Najdorf. There's other book moves as well, but any of the main lines would be considered a book move. Term number 13 is pin. In chess, when a piece is pinned, it means it can't move because something bad is going to happen. There are different types of pins. One pin is where it's pinned to the king. So it's an illegal move if black tries to move this knight somewhere, right? Anywhere that he tries to move the knight, he's putting himself in check. You can't do it. This knight is also pinned because if he tried to move it, something bad is going to happen. He's going to lose his queen. But technically, it's not illegal to move the knight. You're allowed to do it. Still not a good idea. So both of these are pins, just different types of pins. Term number 14 is a chess variant. A variant is just a different type of game that is similar to chess. A lot of times it will use the same pieces as chess, same board, but the rules are different. So for example, 4-player chess, there the board is actually a little bit different. Bughouse is a team game. Fog of War, you can't see your opponent's pieces. only in certain circumstances. There's all different types, but it's basically the rules of chess are a little bit different. One of my favorite variants is what's called horde chess, and one player, white, has all the pawns, and you win by checkmating black's king, and then the other player, the black pieces, has to win by capturing all of white's pawns. Term number 15 is combination. In chess, a combination is kind of like a tactic, so it's a sequence of moves that results in some outcome. Usually it's a good outcome for the player who finds the combination. So in this example, black has set a trap, and if white falls for the trap, captures, it looks like it's a free pawn because of the pin on the queen. Black has this little combination where he can capture the knight, sacrifice his queen, play bishop to b4 check, and white has to give back his queen, takes, and at the end of all that, black is up a piece. He has 3 pieces and white only has 2. So that's just an example of a combination. Term 16 is connected pawns. So any pawns that have another pawn adjacent to it would be considered connected pawns. So in this position, these are connected because there's a pawn next to each other. These are connected, these are all connected. This pawn on d4 is not connected because there are no pawns on either of the adjacent files. Term 17 is connected rooks. In chess, one of the things that you want to do after you develop your pieces is bring your queen up and then castle, because when you castle, you connect your rooks. So that just means that both rooks are protecting each other. And this is good because they help each other. If one of them ever gets attacked, it's always going to be defended by the other rook. Term number 18 is counterattack. This is exactly what you might expect when somebody makes a threat. So in this case, white moves forward and attacks black's knight. Instead of just trying to move the knight, which he can't because it's pinned, but instead of doing something else, trying to defend it, he can counterattack the bishop with a6. This is probably one of the most overlooked aspects of chess. Most players, when they are attacked, immediately start to think about how should they defend and how should they protect the piece or move the piece. But a lot of times, one of the best things that you could do is look for a move to counterattack. Term number 19 is counterplay. It's a little bit different than counterattack. So counterplay happens a lot when you play Gambit. So as an example, e4, e5, d4, takes, c3, takes. This is the Danish Gambit. Bishop c4, takes. In this position, white has given up several pawns, but in return, he gets what's called counterplay. And the counterplay is open diagonals for the bishops and rapid development. So it's an exchange for, usually you give up some material and then you get something in return, which we would refer to as, like I said, counterplay. Term number 20 is a discovered attack. This is when there's a long range piece that's being blocked by another piece, and when you move that other piece out of the way, the long range piece then is discover attacking something else. So in this example, the bishop on e7 is lined up with the bishop on h4, but there's a knight in the way. But if black were to play knight to e4, he unleashes the bishop so that now it's attacking the bishop on h4. That's called a discovered attack. You move the piece out of the way, lets the long range piece out, and you can attack something. This is very powerful. You can see in this position, white has to deal with his queen, and then the discovered attack leads to a free piece for black. Term 21 is discovered check. It's very similar to a discovered attack, except the thing that you're attacking is the king, hence the term discovered check. One of my favorite discovered checks is with a queen blocked by a knight. You move the knight out of the way, like in this case, setting up the discovered check. And when the king moves over, this is a pretty common example, you have smothered checkmate. Term 22 is equalize. So in chess, at the start of the game, white has a very slight advantage. And one of the goals that black should have is trying to equalize. That's your first goal. Once you equalize, then you can move forward and try to get an advantage. But initially, you start out at a disadvantage, so equalizing as black is a really good thing. Term 23 is evaluation, and this just refers to what does the computer think is the evaluation of the position. So at the start of the game, you can see over here on the side, it's relatively equal, 0.2, small advantage for white, like I talked about. But after we make some moves, we'll just say, I don't know, this, and this, and this, terrible move. What's the evaluation? Well, now you can see 6.2 for white. If he captures the evaluation, what the computer thinks of the position is that it's very, very good for white. Term 24 is the exchange. So in chess, rooks are 5 points, knights and bishops are 3 points. And if you can ever trade a bishop for a rook or a knight for a rook, you're winning, some points. You're taking 5 points and you're losing 3 points. But when you do that, that's called winning the exchange. Or if you're black, in this case, you lost the exchange. And so it's kind of like losing a piece, except it's a certain trade. Like if you capture a rook and lose your bishop, you won the exchange. Term 25 is exposed king. So normally kings should be castled and kind of behind a wall of pawns where they're safe and protected. But sometimes things happen. In this example, white can sacrifice his bishop. This is a common idea. And now black's king is exposed. And the benefit that white gets from that is he can follow up with knight g5. And after black tries to go back, the queen can come in and black has some serious problems. So if you can expose your opponent's king, sometimes you have to sacrifice pieces to do that. It's usually a pretty good thing. Term 26 is a fork. This is when one piece attacks two or more pieces at the same time. The most common one that you've probably seen is a knight fork. So in this position, if white plays knight to b5, it's a triple fork on these three pieces. It's usually a really good thing because your opponent can only move one piece at a time, and so you're going to at least be able to capture one of them. You can also do forks with other pieces. Even pawns can do them, like here's another example. And even your king can fork pieces if you move it to the right place and it's attacking two pieces at the same time. Term 27 is flag someone. Somebody just asked about this recently on the channel, but flagging someone just means that you made them run out of time. The reason it's called flagging someone is because when you play in an actual tournament like over the board, the old school clocks before everything was digital, they were analog, and they had a little flag that as you got low on time, the flag would raise up, and then when you ran out of time, the flag would fall, and hence the term flagging someone. Term 28 is NM. NM stands for National Master. This is what I am. That just means I have a rating of 2200 in my national association, which is the USCF. I think there are some other ones as well, but whatever your national chess association is, if you reach a rating of 2200, then you can get the title of NM. Term 29 is CM. This stands for Candidate Master, and it's the next level up from a National Master. Candidate Master means you have to have a rating of 2200 in FIDE. So FIDE is sort of the worldwide chess association, not specific to the United States or any other country. It is worldwide, like I said. And so if you reach 2200 FIDE rating, then you can become, then you are immediately considered a Candidate Master. Term 30 is FM. This is a FIDE Master, very similar to a Candidate Master, except you need to have a rating of 2300 FIDE instead of 2200. And then terms 31 and 32 are IM, International Master, and GM, Grandmaster. And those are the top two levels. The International Master title you get by having a rating of 2400, and you have to get at least 2 IM norms. Norms are like, basically you play in a tournament, and if you do really, really well and have a really high score, and you played against a lot of strong opponents, it's a little more complicated than that. But if you do really well in a couple of tournaments, you can get norms. And if you get 2 norms and your rating is 2400, you can become an IM. Grandmaster is very similar, except you have to have a rating of 2500 and have 2 GM norms, which again, you have to play really, really well in some tournaments. You have to face a certain number of GMs, and they have to be from different federations, and yada, yada, yada. There's all these different requirements, but if you do that twice, you get your 2 norms, and your rating is 2500, then you become a GM. Term 33 is Gambit. This is when you give up usually a pawn or a couple of pawns to get counterplay. We've already actually talked about this, but E4, E5, D4 is the Danish Gambit, where you give up several pawns and you get counterplay of, like I said, the bishops and active pieces, cook development, open files, that kind of thing. Term 34 is good bishop. I think we already touched on this as well, but like G3, bishop G2, this is a good bishop because the bishop is on opposite colors as the pawns around it, and so it has lots of open files, as opposed to a bad bishop when you put your bishop on the same color as your pawns. So term 35 is a half open file. A half open file is a file that only has one color pawn on it. So a good example of this is the center counter defense or the Scandinavian. Immediately we have 2 half open files. This is the half open file for white because there's only one color pawn on it, and this is a half open file for black. There's only one color pawn on this. Usually half open files are good for rooks because the rooks can attack stuff and there's not pawns blocking them. Like in this case, pawns are going to be blocking the rooks if you try to put it on any of the other files. Term 36 is hanging. So when a piece is hanging, it means that it's undefended and can be captured. In this case, the knight is hanging and white can simply take it and lose a piece. Try to avoid hanging pieces if at all possible. Term 37 is major piece. So in chess, the major pieces are the queens and the rooks. They're also called heavy pieces. And then term 38 is minor piece, and the minor pieces are the knights and the bishops. And so if you hear someone say a minor piece or a major piece, you know what they're talking about. Term 39 is hole. In chess, a hole is a spot on the board where no pawns can control it, or usually you can put a piece and it can be kind of just sit there. And so in this example, this is a hole because there's no pawns that can control it, and so my knight can hop in and really just sit there and not have to worry about being chased away by pawns. This is also a hole for black's knight, same idea. There's no pawns that can control it. He can hop his knight in there. Term 40 is inaccuracy. So when you're playing a game and you play a move that's almost the best move, it's a pretty good move, but it's not quite the best move, you would say that's an inaccuracy. You missed the best move, but you still played a good move. It's different than like a blunder where you just completely played a terrible move. Turn 41 is initiative, and turn 42 is tempo. So initiative in chess is usually the side who is being aggressive, and a lot of times they're gaining tempos. So tempos just refer to one, it's a unit of time that refers to one move. So if I make a move, that's a tempo, and then if black makes a move, that's also a tempo. So if you're gaining tempo, you're kind of getting extra moves. Again, we'll go back to the Danish Gambit as an example. As I'm playing moves, I'm gaining tempos because all black is doing is capturing pawns, and I'm doing some other stuff. And so each of these moves here and here is like an extra tempo that I got to develop my pieces. And so because I have that extra development, you would say I have the initiative in this position, right? I'm being aggressive. I'm the one who probably has chances to checkmate or sacrifice pieces or whatever the case may be in exchange for giving up those pawns. Turn 43 is isolated pawn. This is a pawn that has no pawns on the adjacent files. I think we've already talked about this, but this is an isolated pawn because there's no pawns on either side of it. Turn 44 is king hunt. This is when the king is exposed and kind of goes on a run and you're trying to checkmate it. A good example of this would be the fried liver attack. So knight of 3, knight c6, knight g5, d5 takes, and if they capture with the knight, it gives you the opportunity to do this fried liver attack. Queen goes to f3, creating the double attack. The king has to come out to defend the knight, and you kind of end up with this position where it's somewhat like a king hunt, right? White is trying to checkmate black's king, and white has to sacrifice a piece to get here, but usually there's pretty good counterplay. Turn 45 is long diagonal. The long diagonal refers to these diagonals because, yep, you guessed it, they're the longest ones on the board. Turn 46 is main line. So when you're playing an opening, let's say the Sicilian defense, the main line is the most commonly played moves, and most of the time these are the best moves. I think there are certain lines maybe where the main line is not the best, but it's the most popular. But most of the time the main line is going to be the best line. Turn 47 is master. If somebody's a master in chess, that means they have reached the rating of 2200. Then they may or may not have another title to go along with that, but just 2200 and you're considered a master. Turn 48 is material. So when we're talking about a chess game and we're talking about knights and rooks and bishops and queens, that's known as material. And if you lose your pieces, like you lose some knights or bishops or whatever, you lost material. And if you make a good trade where you maybe give up your bishop but you win a rook, you're gaining material. Turn 49 is mouse slip. So you're playing an online chess game, you go to castle, and instead of castling, you just don't move the king all the way, you drop it on f1. It's a bad move, looks kind of weird, but mouse slip. Turn 50 is open file. So an open file has no pawns on it. So in this case, the C file is an open file because the pawns have been traded off. Again, similar to half open files, this is good for rooks because they can control lots of things. There's no pawns blocking them. And usually you can infiltrate the other side of the board. And you know, if I want to bring my rook down to here, it's open to do that. If black wants to bring his rook here, it's open as well. Term 51 is open game, and term 52 is closed game. So you'll hear these terms a lot with different openings. For example, the open Sicilian defense or the closed Sicilian defense. And it just has to do with the type of position that you get out of those openings. As an example, the open Sicilian is knight of 3, d6, d4. And you can see already we've traded off some pawns. There's an open file here, a half open file here, half open file here. You know, some diagonals are open. Very different than if we go to the closed Sicilian, where you would play knight c3, and maybe black plays, let's say, knight c6, g3, e5, bishop g2. You see how nothing has been traded. There's going to be lots of closed files, closed diagonals. It's a very different type of game, tends to be more positional, and open games tend to be more, you know, tactical and aggressive and that kind of thing. Term 53 is opening repertoire. So this is just the opening lines that you have studied and prepared and learned. And so, for example, if I play e4, I know that I need to have a repertoire that includes the moves d5. If somebody plays d5 against me, what am I going to do? I also need to know, what am I going to play against c5? What am I going to play against the French defense? What am I going to play against, you know, whatever the Caracan, whatever they might play, I need to have a response for it, and all those lines that I've prepared and that I've learned would be my opening repertoire. Term 54 is outpost. This is very similar to a hole, but basically you can take advantage of a hole by putting a piece there, and then it kind of becomes an outpost. So for example, if I were to move my knight to d5, I have an outpost there. Black could also do the same thing, like the example we talked about earlier. These would be considered outposts for the knight because it's defended and can't be chased away by other pawns. Term 55 is passive piece. This just means a piece that is not doing a whole lot. So if I played d3, I've just created a bad bishop, which we talked about earlier, but this is also going to be a passive piece. It's not going to have a lot of action because it's really being hindered by this pawn, as opposed to this bishop, much more active because it has a lot of squares it can go to. Term 56 is a pawn chain. Pawn chain just means pawns that are connected and protecting each other. So in this example, white has a very long pawn chain here and black has a pawn chain here because they're connected and protecting each other. Term 57 is pawn island. So a pawn island is just a group of pawns that are connected on adjacent files to each other. So for example, this is a pawn island because these guys are on the same or next to each other on their files. This is another example of an island. It only has one. Here's another island. So white would have 3 different pawn islands. Here's one island, here's another island, and here's another island. And black only has 2 islands, one there and one over here. Term 58 is pawn majority. So if you have more pawns than your opponent, like in this case, black has 3 against 2, black has the pawn majority. On this side, white has 2 against 1, white has the pawn majority. Term 59 is pawn structure. So if you're talking about, connected pawns or isolated pawns, or maybe there's some double pawns, that would be what kind of pawn structure do you have? That's what pawn structure refers to. Term 60 is pre-move. So when you're playing chess, if you play e4, your opponent plays c5, and you play knight f3, and you're expecting that he's going to play, d6, the Sicilian, you might pre-move the move d4. You play it ahead of time, and as soon as he makes a move, any move, the computer is going to make your move, regardless if it's good or not. You see this a lot in bullet chess because you're just running out of time, and so the way to move really fast is to pre-move. It's risky because if your opponent does something that you didn't expect, you might end up making a terrible blunder. Term 61 is sack. It just is short for sacrifice. It means you give up a piece to try to get some sort of counterplay. So in this case, we could sack our bishop, and if black captures, we bring the knight in, and we have some checkmate threats if he's not careful. Term 62 is semi-open file. It's the exact same thing that we talked about earlier with half-open files where there's only one pawn, but some people refer to it as a semi-open file instead of a half-open file. Term 63 is sharp. A sharp position in chess is just one that's very complex and very tricky. So for example, the king's gambit is one of those openings where you're opening up your king right away. So there's lots of tactical ideas that you have to be aware of, but it also creates usually an open F file where you can attack black's king as well, and you get very sharp and tricky positions. Term 64 is skewer. A skewer in chess is when you attack a high value piece and it moves out of the way, and then you're able to capture a lesser value piece behind it. This is an example. Black's king and queen are lined up, so white can skewer them by playing check. The high value piece, the king, has to move, and then it exposes a lesser value piece, the queen, behind, and you can capture it. Term 65 is smothered mate. We've already looked at this earlier, but it's the example where the queen and knight are lined up. You create the discovered double check, has to move, traps the king in the corner after he recaptures, and the knight delivers the checkmate. That's smothered mate. Term 66 is solid. It just means a setup that's very solid. The London system is a good example. There's lots of pawns kind of controlling this central d4 pawn, and everything is very defended and well protected, and it's just a solid position. Term 67 is technique. Usually when you hear the term technique in chess, it's about the end game, and there's like a technique that you need to follow to achieve something. So this is a good example where you have a king and a rook. You have to checkmate black's king. How do you do it? Well, there's a technique that you can use to do that. You make a box and you keep making the box smaller, and you use your king to help, and you get checkmate. There's lots of different situations, like I said, especially in endgames where you have to use a certain technique to do it, but that's what that term refers to. Term 68 is time control. We already talked about bullet chess, blitz chess, rapid chess, those types of things. Those are different examples of different time controls, and depending on what tournament you're playing in or what online game you're playing in, you'll have a different time control. Term 69 is time delay. So when you're playing a game that has time delay, before your actual time starts ticking down, there's a few seconds, usually 3 or maybe 5 seconds, when nothing happens. You just have 5 seconds, you can think, you can make your move, and if you move within that 5 seconds, you won't actually lose any of your regular time. Term 70 is time pressure. When you get low on time and you're worried about losing on time, you make bad moves and play very quickly, and that's time pressure. Term 71 is trap. This could refer to an opening trap like this, where white plays knight takes e5, and if black falls for the trick and takes the queen, he ends up getting checkmated. Opening trap. It could also refer to trapping a piece. So if black makes a mistake and goes bishop b4, we could play a3. And if he goes back here, we can now trap the bishop by playing b4. He goes back c5. This is known as the Noah's Ark trap, and it's a goner. Term 72 is tripled pawn. So it's similar to double pawns, except instead of 2, you have 3 pawns that are all on the same file and are the same color. It's pretty rare, but it can happen. Here's an example where if white captures the knight on c6, black recaptures, he now has tripled pawns. Usually tripled pawns are pretty bad because they are targets, they can't help each other, and they can't really move forward very well either because they're going to be, blocking each other. Term 73 is under promotion. So when you have a pawn and you push it to the end of the board, you don't have to get a queen. If you get something else, that's considered under promotion. In this case, the knight, under promoting to a knight, actually delivers the checkmate and wins the game. Term 74 is variation. So when you're playing through like an opening, there are different variations. So for example, the Queen's Gambit, one variation or one line is the Queen's Gambit accepted. Another variation would be the Queen's Gambit declined. Another variation would be the Slav. And so all different openings have lots and lots of different variations. Term 75 is X-ray. This is just another word for skewer, which we looked at earlier. So if you remember, it's when you attack the high value piece, force it out of the way, and then you take another piece of lesser value behind it. The example earlier was with the rook. Here's an example with the bishop, or we're skewering the king and the queen after black moves, then we can capture the queen. So X-ray or skewer, same thing. Wow, that was a lot of terms, I'm not gonna lie. I am kind of tired from doing this video. I hope that was helpful to someone and it wasn't just like too basic and stuff that you already knew. Yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. If you knew all those, let me know in the comments. I'd be interested to see how many people actually knew all 75 of those. Yeah, as always, thanks for watching. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.